Uh, well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Can everybody hear me? Is the mic is working? Excellent. It's working. Well, thank you. This is my third trip to Korea this year because I'm always very excited to understand the future. And the future seems to happen here first. I live in Silicon Valley, so the connection between the two is fascinating. I want to talk to you today about the Maker City. It really is a set of ideas about how we all prepare for the future at a time of exponential change, rapid change. A time when we change our microphones. And what we'll see is we're going to work through concepts of the maker movement, changes in education, changes in manufacturing, and even where blockchain fits into all of this. A lot of the work that I do is with cities, and I find cities fascinating because they're the most interesting organism on Earth. They are where change and innovation takes place. You know, when the internet started, people imagined we wouldn't need cities because everybody could be anywhere on Earth and just work from home. But that's not what happened, because it turns out that in cities, it's dense, and this density leads to innovation. And it turns out that in a world of the internet and the cloud, when more and more of the hardware you need to build things sits up in the cloud, you don't have to invest in a lot of servers. They're just there. You build on other people's software. What the premium are people and their ideas and how quickly those ideas grow. And that's why cities are attracting so many people these days. And it's why a lot of the work that I do in the U.S. is with secondary cities. And the question is, how do you get them to grow as quickly as well and take advantage of innovations? This is important because as cities grow, you know, they're a little bit like Google or Amazon. The big ones get a lot bigger, and other ones are left behind. It poses a really interesting economic development challenge. This is a map of where venture capital goes in the United States. And as you can see, venture capital goes to about two places. It goes to around California and around New York, and that's because the biggest cities are there. And a very big project now is how do you spread innovation a bit more everywhere? That's a political problem because that spread of innovation is what led to the concerns around Brexit. It's what led to the political problems in the United States where the manufacturing center of the United States was unhappy and voted one way, and the more new technology and media part of the United States went elsewhere. So smoothing that out turns out to be one of the great projects on Earth and one of the great ways to drive innovation. So this puts a premium on economic growth and attracting talent. It turns out this is what cities do. Cities compete because they attract the best talent, they have the most growth. Cities are also like these organisms that drive skills development. You know, at a time when education is changing quickly, the faster people learn new skills, whether it's manufacturing skills, retraining skills, math skills. That's how cities and countries compete. How we apply artificial intelligence to do that, new techniques is very important. So all of these are the things that cities need to do. And what I've realized in working with cities as a platform is the highest purpose of a city, in many ways, is to prepare its citizens for the future. Look, the future's coming really quickly. People are worried about the jobs that will go away, the manufacturing jobs that have moved elsewhere, which is an issue in this region, preparing people. And so it turns out cities, also this comes at a time when people don't trust national governments as much. This is certainly true in the United States, but they trust local governments. They trust cities. So what I want to talk today about is the Maker City. Now, how many people here know what the Maker movement is? Have heard of this, right? So the Maker movement, you know, when you think about it, you think of 3D printing, maker fairs. It's really about using tools to make things. In the 20th century, a lot of us became consumers, and then stuff came from Samsung or came from China. You never really knew where the stuff came from. And it turns out understanding how you make things and that curiosity and those skills are part and parcel of learning and participation. This term Maker City really means two things. We mean Maker City as in a place with a lot of people that have the skills of the fourth industrial revolution and the math and science skills, the creative skills. But it also means Maker City, people who actually participate and co-create and make the city. Now, a lot of this work we did with President Obama. President Obama saw that if you brought together the skills portion of this, the economic development portion of this, the science portion, you could really push things further. And we had several White House maker fairs with the president, where we invited over 100 cities in the United States to become maker cities. By the way, the president has a great quote. He said, the United States did not become the strongest economy on earth by buying stuff. We became it by making stuff, by building stuff. So remembering how to do that. Remember, the United States, a lot of our manufacturing went overseas, so a lot of it's about changing that. We had 100 cities sign up to be maker cities, and then we wrote a book about what went on. Amazingly, that book came out in English 2 years ago, and it came out in Korean last year. And what's very exciting is these ideas are now being used around this country, both for educational and economic development purposes, which is why I'm thrilled to share these with you today. By the way, when we talk about making, there's a set of ideas or ethoses that are at work here, which I want to mention. So first of all, these contrast with the 20th century, and they're very much in line with what Brock talked about when he talked about the starfish versus the spider. The starfish is regenerative. It builds upon itself. So the making ethos is open source. You come up with an idea and you share it. People build something and it's shared, it's not as competitive. It's always about learning. You know, we have education as something you do and then you leave. But at a time of rapid change, you're always having to learn. And this field teaches that. It's also about experimentalism and play. In the software world, we learned if there's a problem, you're constantly fixing it. And the making world is very much about that form of experimentalism in an ongoing basis. And it turns out this plays into the world of industry in an interesting way, in the world of manufacturing. For example, this is a typical makerspace. Here's a space where people are 3D printing, scanning, they're sewing, someone's working in composites, there's casting going on, vinyl cutting. So you might think, well, this is fun for students, but does it apply in the real world? Well, here is General Electric's appliance plant in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, they make washing machines and they make stoves there, but you can imagine if you're in the innovation department of appliances, there's a problem. It costs $40 million to bring an appliance to market, so if you make a mistake, that's expensive. And most people who buy appliances aren't early adopters. You know, it might be your wife's third stove or your second dryer. So that's not the most innovative stuff in the world. So how do you fix that? Well, what General Electric did is they built a makerspace. They invited in students. They invited in people who like to cook. They invited in the community to hack appliances, to build new appliances. The general idea was if you came up with an idea, you could build it and put it on Kickstarter, which is a crowdfunding platform. And if it was a good idea, then it turned into a GE product. They turned the expense of research and development basically into a profit center of learning while helping students and people in the community. Here's a peek at General Electric.
So when we say hack the home, we really mean it. Our hope is that you might take an oven or a refrigerator or a microwave, go ahead and break it, because we know you're going to come out with something cool from that.
Most hackathons come from a software perspective. I work on my computer, we work at our machine, and you could really do that about anywhere. What we've done here with this facility is we've tied in mechanical engineers, we've tied in designers. This is big open collaboration. I think the next set of American manufacturing is going to be more niche, diverse. It's not, I'm an electrical engineer or I'm a software engineer, I'm a maker.
This is further proof that the maker movement is blowing up. In 10 years, we're going to look back and be like, I can't believe we did all that stuff.
You know, if you think about it, in the content, there's this notion of the long tail. On Amazon.com or the internet, every piece of content's available. As we know, some of it's not so nice. But everything's available, and this is kind of bringing that to the manufacturing world. And what did they come up with? It's really interesting to see. Someone came up with an induction cooker. So that basically doesn't use heat, but because it's full of sensors and data, it gets a sous verde done completely perfectly. You know that lovely crunchy ice you sometimes get at a bar or a restaurant? Someone built one of those. That was the #1 new product on Amazon Electronics. Dreamed up by students, executed at General Electric, brought to market by GE, but they had no idea it was coming because it didn't cost $40 million. People just did it. Here was another one. This is a cold brewed coffee maker. Sometimes it takes hours to make cold brewed coffee. This does it in minutes. And so they put this on Kickstarter, but it failed. It failed because it worked, but they tried to raise $300,000. They didn't get it. Well, normally if I told you it would be a failure, that's not so good. But it turns out they failed really early on. They didn't waste any venture capitalist money. They kept their idea and they learned. This is so much better than the old way of spending millions and getting something wrong. So this is actually what success looks like when it's at work. Now, it turns out this plays out in large companies in the strangest ways. Ford Motor Company put a Makerspace in for its employees. Now, if you actually look at in Ford, about 1% of the people actually are involved in the manufacturing process of cars. Then there's lots of engineers who work on a piece of it, and many more in marketing or accounting who never get to make cars. But they probably love cars because they went to work for Ford. So what they basically said is, in your free time, come make stuff. Well, this did two things. In 1 year, Ford turned out to zoom ahead of Toyota, GM, and Honda as the #1 holder of new patents in the world, because all those people were having ideas. It also helped Ford get a bunch of new ideas, and more importantly, this was a mechanism that started training older Ford employees with new skills, so when they retired, they had something to do. It's a benefit in being in Ford. Meanwhile, they got 1,400 new patents, they doubled it, and it created 5,000 inventors in Ford, and now 4,000 first-time inventors. So that is making an old line company more innovative, and you would not have expected that. And this, of course, is an idea that could apply easily to any manufacturing company in Korea. When we talk about a maker city, the very notion of a city and how it behaves is different. Here's the Tesla motor plant in Fremont, California. That used to be a failed General Motors and Toyota plant. And because it was a messy car plant, there were many acres around it that you wouldn't want to go into because they were dirty. So there had to be there was like, here's the car plant, and here's where people live. Well, Tesla figured out it was a clean factory. It's like an electronics factory. So the Tesla factory, the transit, and the housing are all on the same street. They couldn't even hire an urban planner who knew how to put an auto plant next to apartment buildings, because no one had done it in 100 years, and it was against every city code in the world. So they just made it up. They literally had to hire new people and said, you're in charge, come up with an idea.
Hi, I'm Nick Pinkston.
Before we get to Nick. All right, so it also turns out that making and manufacturing, the world of manufacturing is speeding up to the world of software. So companies like Google and Facebook, they fix stuff overnight. Car companies, they fix stuff every year. You bring those things together, if you're Facebook with Oculus or you're Tesla, you want your factory to have a new idea and build a new part tomorrow. So meet Nick Pinkston, the man who hooks up software and robots and is changing manufacturing in San Francisco.
Hi, I'm Nick Pinkston. I'm the founder of Plethora. Essentially, we're building a new kind of factory that makes us you can go from a design to a part very quickly. So, like, we're talking same-day manufacturing here.
We actually have to be as close to our customers as possible because our customers want speed more than anything else. So essentially, we are blocks for many of our customers. They can just walk over here and pick up their parts. If they're waiting weeks for things to go overseas or go from other shops, they're behind. So you're having suppliers from the very high end, multinational companies are coming back, they wouldn't be in market, all the way down to like guys in the garage working on something. Like this entire thing from components and short-run production and prototypers and mass manufacturers, all of this is now coming back to cities because we have to be more reactive. We have to actually build things here because we have to innovate directly in market.
I'd like to apologize to the translators. Nick did not know he'd be speaking to a Korean translator when he was so excited, and he spoke to me like that. But you can see what's going on here. Manufacturing is adopting many of the techniques of software to get caught up, and it's closer to the cities where manufacturing is.
If machines are going to take our jobs, we might as well do it with style. MX3D, a research and development startup specializing in robotic 3D print technology, is hoping to construct a bridge over a canal in Amsterdam sometime this September using only 2 robots. They start on either bank and work their way toward each other in the middle, projecting molten steel as they go, crafting their beams from multiple angles instead of on a more typical horizontal plane. The molten metal can be shaped by the printer to produce straight lines, spirals, really any shape the engineers have in mind. Don't think the MX3D team has missed out on the symbolism either. They note their choice to construct a bridge is a beautiful metaphor to connect the technology of the future with the old city. bringing out the best of both worlds.
Now, this is a fascinating project that Autodesk led. You know, the cost of building materials is going up. Housing is very expensive in the world. Building is expensive. 30% of the waste in the world is construction waste. So if you were able to use advanced technology to get around that, it would work well. So this project began as a 3D printed bridge, and that's actually what the bridge looks like. Just before they put it in place, they took it to the design fair. You see kids running over it because that bridge is full of sensors. It's a living bridge. It understands how it's being used, what the stresses are, and then that data reports back into the use of future bridges. So this is what happens when you add the Internet of Things and big data to the built environment. It gets smarter, less expensive over time. The other thing is all the tools that are being used here are available basically for free to school kids because Autodesk makes that software available to kids for free. And it's learning software. It actually uses artificial intelligence to come up with designs, and then you're sitting there and it understands what you're good at, and it starts guiding people how to be smarter and better. So when we say a maker city prepares its citizens for the future, a lot of this has to do with bringing in new forms of education, which is both science and technology based, but also art based. This is nowhere better shown than in the town of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which you may remember was a steel town, and the U.S. steel industry fell apart. And Pittsburgh successfully transferred from steel to software and software to robotics. And then about 10 years ago when they saw education changing, they smashed the art department, the shop department, and computer science into one department. And this is what happened.
The Dream Factory is a combination of 3 classes that were previously separated. The art room, the tech ed room, and computers.
All 3 teachers collaborate and bring together art and engineering.
When it's hands-on learning, it's something that you want to do.
What we need are measurements. When you have a board, they go with the board.
They get ads to our traditional wood shop, metal shop.
Students are programming interactive games, building robots.
Do they want to do 3D printing? Do they want to do painting? Do they want to do sculpture?
This is not a gifted program. It's not an after-school activity. Every kid is getting this in our school.
But what's important about that is literally every kid in the school. And when they came up with it, a lot of superintendents of schools didn't want anything to do with it because it was different. One person put their hand up and said, I'll try it in my school. And test scores went up by about 30%.